Honourable Member Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare.
Tēnā koe.
Well, the Green Party has supported this local electoral amendment bill at all stages, and we will continue to support it today in the third reading. And we support it because, Mr Speaker, we support the modernisation of electoral law and greater transparency at a principled level wherever we can. And this bill does move our local electoral law in that direction, and therefore it is worthy of our support. We know, of course, what gave rise to the need for this bill, and it's been referred to by previous speakers, and that is, of course, John Banks' questionable conduct in the 2010 local body election in Auckland mayoralty race, particularly regarding the identity of anonymous donations. And that case, I think, certainly highlighted gaps in the current legislation governing local body elections that urgently needed to be closed. And it's good that this legislation closes them, but it's a shame that the approach taken was simply to close those gaps and not to take a wider view and look at how to bring the legislation governing local elections actually in line with that governing general elections across the board. Now, a lot of speakers have referred to this or talked about this bill as though its purpose is to align those two provisions. And I want to set the record straight, because although it does that in a very limited way, unfortunately it is only in a very limited way that it aligns the provisions, and in most aspects there remain still large gaps between the provisions governing local body elections and those governing general parliamentary elections. Now, it does somewhat align the provisions, and most importantly, it does so that anyone who works with a candidate and who knows the identity of someone who makes a donation of over $1,500 must declare the identity of that donor to the candidate, and that has arisen directly as a result of the John Banks case. And also, thanks to the Minister's SOP, which we support, the same provisions now apply for donations funded from contributions of over $1,500. And those are good provisions, Mr Speaker, but in many other ways this bill is a missed opportunity to more closely align the provisions for local and general elections. For example, it could have included, and doesn't, a $5,000 cap on donations by any person or group to a candidate, a lower limit for anonymous donations of $500, a ban on overseas donations, penalties for avoiding rules related to donations, which is quite important. If there aren't penalties for avoiding the rules, then there's not the right incentives in place to comply with them. It could have included regulation of third-party spending in local elections, something that's very important that I'll come back to shortly. And it could have included a register of pecuniary interests for elected members of local authorities. Now, if it did that, it would truly be aligning local electoral law with that governing general elections. All of these measures were included in a supplementary order paper in my name during the committee stages, and it was disappointing, therefore, that the House didn't take the opportunity to adopt these measures to increase transparency in local democracy and to actually align the provisions of local body elections with those governing general elections, as many have said they would like to see us do. Fortunately, the measures that I've outlined are also contained in a member's bill in the name of my colleague Denise Roche, and so for now we'll have to hope that her bill is drawn from the ballot so that the House will have the opportunity to revisit these measures in the future. Mr Speaker, in considering this bill, some have put the argument to me that local body elections are lower profile and less likely to attract high levels of attention, less likely to attract high levels of anonymous donations and third-party spending, and that therefore there is no need to further align the rules of local elections with those governing parliamentary elections. And I think this is a very flawed argument, and I want to address it now briefly by focusing on the issue of third-party spending, which this bill fails to regulate. And it's a glaring omission that this bill does nothing at all to regulate third-party spending in local body election campaigns. Now, to give you a practical example of that, we know, because of media coverage and reports, that there is a wealthy individual in Hamilton who intends to spend a large amount of his own money to actively campaign against every single incumbent councillor on the Hamilton City Council. And there is nothing at all in the current provisions, nor this legislation, that would in any way restrict or regulate how that individual can campaign. Because he's not campaigning for any particular candidate, he is unrestricted in what he can spend and unrestricted in what he can say in his efforts to campaign against the incumbents, even though there are numerous restrictions on how the candidates themselves can campaign and what they can spend and what they have to disclose in local body elections. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, this example highlights the unfairness of not regulating third-party spending at the same time as we regulate what candidates do. We're also, in local body elections, increasingly seeing the use of joint campaign tickets or platforms, and even now established political parties standing candidates for local body elections on a ticket or on a platform manner. And again, there's nothing in the current provisions nor in this legislation to limit how much someone can donate to a platform or a ticket, or to regulate in any way the requirements of disclosure of those donations, because provided it's not allocated to an individual candidate on that ticket, there is no need to disclose those donations and no limit on what they are, no limit or requirements on how that money can be spent. And Mr. Speaker, in an era, I think, of increasing professionalisation of local government, which is a good thing given its vital role in the governance of our communities, and in an era of increased amalgamation of local councils, meaning very high-profile, high-spend contests like the Auckland Mayoralty, this gap in failing to regulate third-party spending needs to be rectified as soon as possible. It's a serious omission, Mr. Speaker, and this bill really should have addressed it. Now, to its credit, the Select Committee, which must be commended, I think, for very constructive work on this bill, I very much enjoyed being part of the discussions on this bill in the committee. Notwithstanding, I think, that the amendments didn't go far enough, the Select Committee did actually identify third-party spending as a gap in this legislation and recommended that the Minister consider bringing amendments to this effect at the committee stage, and unfortunately this did not eventuate. But I do take some hope from the support of the committee that there will be some attention paid to this issue in the near future, because clearly it does need to be addressed. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the other area of concern for the Green Party in this bill was the provisions that give the Minister of Local Government the power to postpone or adjourn local body elections. And our concern on this front, Mr. Speaker, comes from, unfortunately, the general disregard that's been shown by this government for local democracy, including not only sacking the democratically elected councillors of Environment Canterbury, but twice postponing their elections. This provision seems rather dangerous to give, once again, a dangerous amount of power to the Minister to postpone local body elections. Now, we do recognise that there may be, and indeed likely in future will be, some situations in which it is necessary to adjourn elections, such as in the aftermath of a natural disaster. But in our view, Mr. Speaker, it should be the electoral officer and not the Minister who makes that decision. There's no need for that decision to be made at the political level, at the ministerial level, when it is a practical decision about whether a community is able to hold an election in the aftermath of a natural disaster. So again, we put up an SOP to this effect at the Select Committee stage in the name of my colleague Eugenie Sage, which would extend the same powers but give them to the electoral officer, not the Minister. And unfortunately, that was not supported by the House either. But, Mr. Speaker, these concerns notwithstanding, this bill is, broadly speaking, a good one, albeit a missed opportunity to make more of the changes required to laws governing our local body elections. So the Green Party supports this bill, and we look forward to it being in place in time for the 2013 local body elections later this year to ensure that we do not ever see a repeat of the situation that we saw in Auckland in 2010.
I call the Honourable Member Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to take a call on this bill tonight.